Tonight, our special transmission as a former producer exposes Palestinian bias at the Canadian public broadcaster, the CBC. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. This is Muslim News Canada on Muslim Network TV. I'm Aisha Ashraf. It has been 228 days since the onset of Israel's war. The Israeli military has confirmed hitting approximately 70 targets in Gaza in the past 24 hours. Palestinian news agency reports an Israeli airstrike has struck a group of civilians in the Yabna refugee camp in Rafah. At least 5 civilians have been killed, including 3 children. The air attacks on Jabalia and Beit Lebia in northern Gaza today have killed 18 civilians. Earlier today, Israeli forces started a raid in Jenin in the West Bank. Israeli forces killed at least 7 people, including a teacher, a doctor, and a 9th grade student. In a recent briefing at the Security Council, a United Nations official said the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is worsening. He says 40% of the population has been displaced in recent weeks. This makes nearly 90,000 civilians being left without homes and shelters. He says there are dire conditions in Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah. A vast majority of Palestinians are seeking refuge in these areas. He says Palestinians in Gaza are facing severe shortages of food, water, and shelter. 1.1 million Palestinians are at risk of famine. The death toll from Israel's war continues to mount. At the time of writing, at least 35,562 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces. A revised report by the United Nations estimates another 10,000 civilians are buried under the rubble. 79,652 Palestinians have been injured. Israel's death toll from Hamas attacks stands at 1,139. Israel is accused of genocide at the International Court of Justice. The top court has ordered Tel Aviv to ensure its forces do not commit acts of genocide. It has ordered Israel to take measures to guarantee that humanitarian assistance is provided to civilians in Gaza. The International Criminal Court has applied for arrest warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders. Prosecutor Karim Khan says Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant bear responsibility for intentional attacks on civilians and starvation as a method of warfare. He says collected evidence, including eyewitness accounts, authenticated media, and satellite imagery, indicates systematic deprivation of essential supplies to civilians in Gaza. Khan emphasized the importance of applying the law equally to all parties. He says the World Court is also seeking warrants for Hamas's top leaders, including Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, and Ismail Haniyeh. Khan has accused Hamas's top leaders of crimes such as hostage-taking and sexual violence. Israeli Minister Benny Gantz condemns the move. Gantz calls the decision a distortion of justice. Hamas leaders say the decision is like equating victims with perpetrators. In related news, the U.S. rejects the World Court's decision to apply for arrest warrants for Israeli leaders. It says the World Court lacks jurisdiction to issue warrants as Israel is not a member of the World Court. On the other hand, it welcomes the warrants for Hamas's leaders. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller says Israel should hold Hamas accountable and in a court of law. He says there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. U.S. officials are helping to intensify the search for Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. The Biden administration is fully supporting Israel. It is fast-tracking weapons shipments while providing a diplomatic shield for Israel at the UN. Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader in the Senate, says he fiercely opposes the World Court's decision. Bernie Sanders, an independent senator, says the World Court has the right to take these actions. Israeli officials have denied any involvement in the helicopter crash that killed Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi and senior officials near Azerbaijan border. The news comes after Iranian media reported that Raisi's helicopter made a hard landing. Raisi had attended a dam inauguration in the border area along with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and was returning to Iran. Iran's foreign minister, Azerbaijan's governor, Imam of Tabriz Mosque, and other officials have died in the crash. The crash is being attributed to adverse weather conditions. Former Qatar Prime Minister Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim Al Thani has disclosed a concerning plan to dismantle the Palestinian cause. In a post on social media platform X, Al Thani says there is a need for a united front. He is urging Palestinians to unite across Gaza and the West Bank to counter this threat. He is warning against a scheme to eliminate the two-state solution and is urging Palestinians to remain vigilant. He did not give details, but says there is an urgent need to thwart this plan. Al Thani says he is frustrated over global inaction amid ongoing tragedies in Gaza. He is criticizing the indifference of Islamic nations and urging them to take substantive action. He is calling for international support to help Gaza rebuild and compensate for losses. A former CBC producer has come forward with allegations of bias and discrimination in coverage of Palestine and Gaza at Canada's public broadcaster. The producer says he has worked with CBC for 6 years. He has detailed experiencing double standards while reporting on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Independent digital media outlet The Breach reports the producer's attempts to bring balanced views and interviews on the conflict have been met with resistance. The producer also highlights instances of Palestinian guests being scrutinized or canceled, unlike their Israeli counterparts. The former employee says a Palestinian-Canadian psychotherapist whose relative died in an airstrike faced unusual verification demands before appearing on air. On November 10th, an interview he had set up with a Palestinian-Canadian entrepreneur, Khaled Al-Sabawi, was canceled. Sabawi had lost 50 of his relatives in Israeli airstrikes. After raising these concerns internally and facing accusations of anti-Semitism, the producer has resigned. Recent polling data reveals a significant shift in voter support among Muslim and Jewish communities. The data poses a challenge for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party in the upcoming elections. The Angus Reid Institute's latest poll indicates that the federal New Democratic Party is now leading among Muslim voters with 41% support. The Conservatives are ahead among Jewish voters with 42% support. Despite Trudeau's past efforts to court Muslim voters, recent events seem to have strained Liberal support among these communities. Dissatisfaction with the government's response to the conflict, including a controversial vote on arms exports to Israel, has led to a negative shift in opinion among both Muslim and Jewish voters. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has won his bid to appeal against extradition to the US. The UK's High Court has granted Assange a full appeal hearing to argue his case. Assange contends that his right to free speech may not be protected in a U.S. trial. Assange's legal team argues that U.S. assurances regarding his First Amendment rights are inadequate. Following the decision, hundreds of supporters gathered outside the court in celebration. Assange's wife is hailing the ruling as a turning point. Amnesty International welcomes the decision. The organization says the decision is very important for press freedom globally. President Biden faces growing pressure to drop the charges on Assange. The charges were initiated under former President Trump. Media reports indicate possible reconsideration of Assange's charges. Thank you for watching. Our news is produced by Muslim Network TV, which is a not-for-profit organization. We need your support for donations. Please scan the QR code on our broadcast or visit muslimnetwork.tv to donate now, so we can continue to amplify the voices of Muslims in Canada and abroad.